Welcome to the Chirp YouTube channel. My name is Christy. I am your friendly online speech-language pathologist and specialist in children's communication development, which includes behavior, because behavior is one type of communication. Today, we are going to talk about what to do if you are feeling that you need to start some sort of special needs supportive program. This is the field that I have been in for 20 plus years, closer to 25, and it is something that I'm currently going through all over again. My story, a short version anyway, is that when I finished graduate school in 2001, yes, I am that old, I immediately got pulled in my local church to supporting children who were struggling in our typical children's programming. And from that time on through the current day, I have been doing that. I started a program at our first local church in Arizona, and that program grew very large, and I'm very proud of what we accomplished. And then my husband and I moved on to a different church in Arizona and did a similar thing there. I founded and developed their programming, and eventually we left that church as well. We moved home back to Minnesota after 26 years, and I started attending a church that I used to attend in college before I moved away. And I've been working with the children at this new church for 4.5 years now. We have not had, since I moved home during COVID, we did not have volunteers to have a separate pull-out space. So I've been working in our typical programming, and I've been training other adults how to manage any of the behaviors that might come up with the kids in their groups. And it's been delightful. I love my local church. I love the other volunteers that I get to work with. And of course, I really love the students. They are fantastic. And the time has come now when it's very clear to us as a grown-up team that there are some kids in our group who need to get pulled out. They are not successful behavior-wise, and they are not successful learning the kinds of things that we want them to be learning. During the past 4.5 years that I have been at this new church, the staff might not have known that I was working a plan, but I was working a plan. And I'm going to share that plan with you right now. The plan is, how do we develop more supportive programming for kids in our environment who need it? And I'm going to be talking about this from a church perspective. If you have a synagogue, if you have some sort of temple or other religion besides Christianity, this information can still be useful to you, because I believe every space, every group of people who gathers together is going to have people in it whose needs are outside of the norm, whose brains are outside of the norm. And we, as kind and compassionate human beings, can adapt to serve a wider range of people. And I believe that as compassionate people, that is our job. We need to be looking for people who need different supports and try to provide those. The first thing we're going to do is to gather a group of like-minded individuals. I'm usually the head of this process because I choose to use the energy and charisma that I do have to invest in people, to make them feel welcome in the children's environment that I volunteer in. And I start to talk to them during this very early stages of this process about what my vision is long term. I started this very early. Before I even came to the church, I already had met with some people and discussed my long-term plans and what I wanted to happen in our community for the sake of these kids and these families. And then once I got to being a regular volunteer, I volunteer every week with the children's ministry. And so all the families know me and all the kids know me. My face is very recognizable to almost everyone because I'm always there. And I'm pretty much the only person other than staff who is always there. And yes, I'm doing all this as a volunteer. Not everyone has that capacity. I do, because I can talk about this in a different video, but my life trajectory was suddenly shifted because I got diagnosed with some health concerns that meant that working full-time in a normal job was not possible for me any longer. And so I've had to pivot a bit and come up with other ways of supporting kids, educating and advocating, and sharing love, being welcoming in ways that are meaningful to me, that make my life feel meaningful, and that use the education and experience that I have, because it would be a waste for that just to be not used. So I have pivoted, and I invest a lot in my local church and in people who are in my moral vicinity and my physical vicinity. So very early on, I began talking up the idea of how great it would be to be able to welcome any child who came through our doors. Of course, we're going to have forms that their families fill out so that we're prepared for the needs that their children have, but we can assure families that their children will be safe, that their children will have fun, and that their children will learn something that day. Because I believe that everyone has the capacity to learn. So that was step number 1. Make sure that you are gathering a team of like-minded individuals. You do not always have to be talking about what you believe your mission to be. That is the question you should be asking yourself during this time. What is my mission? My mission is to be a church that is welcoming to children and people who are not children of all abilities. Of course, we do have one caveat. If students are consistently aggressive, i.e. violent, at a level that no one in our program is capable of managing, that is the one case where we will request that there's a different solution to the problem. Now, in almost 25 years of doing running these type of programs, I have never had to do that, and I have dealt with some very challenging children. I'm exceptionally well trained. I have a lot of experience, and I have a lot of education behind me, and I have to get continuing education all the time, and I try to get all of it in the area of behavior management and creative ideas for dealing with very challenging behaviors. Because that is the number one question I get from families, and that's the number one problem that a child would have. If a child can't communicate, that's easy to work on, and it doesn't harm anyone else. But if a child is consistently violent, as that child grows, that problem becomes bigger and bigger, as well as the child becoming bigger and bigger. And it does get in the way of that child being able to participate full-time in life. So that's something that we need to deal with carefully. And that's why I continue to educate myself. And that is step number 2. Step number 2 is to make sure that you are getting educated, and that as you're beginning to ramp up to any sort of program that you launch, you make sure your volunteers who are going to be volunteering with you are also getting some form of education. This is a very niche field, even though a huge percentage of people, children in our world, have differences of development. People are still not quite sure what to do with these kids or with these behaviors, not quite sure how to teach or how to welcome these children and their families. This YouTube channel is a great place to come to pick out a video, send it to other people who might be joining your team, watch it, and then talk about it. And at the same time, you are educating yourself with a video. Don't watch them all at once. Watch one a week and think about it and ponder it. You should also be getting to know the children in the environment that you are hoping to support. I have been working with a majority typical developing kids for 4 years. And over that time, we've had kids come who are not typical, and I have gathered them into a little pod and into my heart, and I have been working with them more directly. And the typical kids have been in other people's groups, but if those teachers have questions, I am there to support them as well. We have to get to know the children and the families before we know what their needs are going to be. And if you open a classroom, spur of the moment, next Sunday, you advertise to your community, hey, we have this new program for kids with communication and sensory differences. Bring your kids on Sunday. And you don't have a sign up and you didn't educate yourselves, it's going to be a dangerous disaster because you are not prepared for the difficulties that these children might have and you don't have the resources to meet their needs. We do not want you failing like that. What we do want is we want you to get to know the children in your own environment first, and then you can research ways that you can better support those particular students. Work within the environment you're already in before you start thinking about any sort of outreach. Also, if you recognize challenges that are already happening, especially with behavior, or if you realize you're going to have to come up with some sort of communication supports, reach out to a professional. There are probably speech-language pathologists in your community who would be willing to consult with you, to train you. I do this. There are many different ways that you can get yourself supported and educated. The third step is to choose a delivery model. And this is where you're going to be thinking about, are we going to have a classroom where kids are separated from typical kids? Are we going to have our neuroatypical kids integrated into the typical programming? How are we actually going to run this program? What's it going to look like? When a family comes in, how is that going to work? Because I've done this for so long, I have thoughts about how all this works best. In my opinion, kids past a certain level of need are really frustrated by typical programming and do not succeed, do not thrive, and are pretty distracting. And where that line is going to depend on your programming and on the supports that are already in place. Some programs are so visual already, are so calming for children that kids who are not typical don't need a different environment. But that is almost impossible to provide in this day and age because most kids' programming is very exciting and very loud and very stimulating, and our kids who have different kind of nervous system do not benefit from all of that. Plus, a lot of children's programming is not physically a secure place for children who might run away if they're overstimulated. A lot of there are so many reasons why I think a separate environment, at least as an option, is a very important thing for any children's program. We need to have a place where kids can leave the typical overstimulating environment to feel safe. And there will be some kids who will be in that environment full time. In my program, there will be a good number of kids who are in that environment full time, but there will be some who may go back and forth, but they may have a support person to go with them when they attend typical programming and then to walk back to our classroom with them for safety purposes. We have to play it by ear. Our kids are individuals, and we have to be able to be flexible enough that they can continue to be individuals and they don't have to fit a particular mold because they don't fit the mold already. Step number 4, figure out your systems. Systems being, how will I communicate with my volunteers? How will I do scheduling? How will I communicate with family members? Will the check-in process be different for my students versus all the other students who check in? What if a volunteer who's assigned to a particular student is sick? What do I do? Now I have answers for all these things for you, and I can do a follow-up video on some of those as we go forward. I don't want this video to be an hour long, so I will keep it short, but you have to think through all these things so that you're ready to be a functioning program. You need to think like a business instead of like a loosey-goosey sort of babysitting program. You're not babysitters, and you can't afford to act loosey-goosey because these are kids with very real needs, and if their needs are not met, bad things can happen, and I do not want you to experience those things. So we are thinking ahead together to make your program successful. Also in this list, you want to add, how do you train new volunteers? How do you place new volunteers? How do you discover if a volunteer is a good fit for a student in your program? How do you manage if 2 students really play off each other poorly and do not get along? What do you do? We need to think through all these things. Now, we can't always find a solution for all of them, and sometimes I've only thought about these things when they happened. So there are times when I also failed to plan because I did not expect a particular event to occur. But then it did, and I had to come up with a solution. Step 5, you need to pick a curriculum. I have done lots of videos about curricula because I am a curriculum developer. This is one of the ways that my career pivoted when I became too ill to do a typical speech pathology job in a school or a clinic or a hospital. And I'm happy that this is how things ended up, even though I didn't enjoy being sick. I'm much better now. And I needed the curriculum that I wrote because I did a lot of looking and I did a lot of failing trying to teach what I believe is important to teach in my children's program. Sometimes you just have to write something yourself. Now, I have a video right here for you, more specifically about the development of the CHIRP curriculum, which is the curriculum that I provide to churches, Christian churches, who are trying to teach the basics of who God is, who Jesus is, how to follow Jesus, and how the Holy Spirit working with us changes us to become more like Jesus as we say yes to Him. That is the curriculum that I use because it works, it's simple, it's interactive instead of being a screen. I don't agree with screen times to teach children. It just doesn't work. And our kids, especially with neurodivergent ways of thinking, they need interpersonal learning. It's very important. I have another video right here which talks through what children need from a curriculum, what you need to make sure that you are looking for and make sure that you find before you pick a curriculum. Of course, the CHIRP curriculum meets all those expectations. There may be others that do as well. I haven't found them, but they may exist, so keep your eyes open. Number 6, once you have in your head an idea of some of the students who might be joining your program, and maybe once you have in your head the idea of which kind of students could come into your program because you have been educating yourself this whole time about different needs that students have, you need to figure out how you're going to meet students' needs. One of the things you have to consider is communication. How will you meet your students' communication needs? Will you be using a device? I don't. They cost thousands of dollars. Will you be using an iPad that the child brings in? Will you be using a communication book? I have a series about those right there. That's what I use in my classroom when kids are minimally or nonverbal or when they just need help communicating because it's overwhelming. There are lots of different ways, lots of different solutions. How will you meet students' sensory needs? I have a really great series on that right here, and I hope that it helps you as you're thinking through the different needs that your students might have. I should do a video. I should write this down. I should do a video about a starter pack for a classroom. A little starter pack of things that I definitely think are important in a classroom to meet communication needs, things that are important in a classroom to meet sensory needs. You can get the basics of those from the videos I linked, but I think a video on each of those separately would probably also be helpful. How are you going to meet children's behavior regulation needs? How are you going to deal with restrictive diets? I don't know that this is so much the case anymore, but for many years, a lot of families of students diagnosed with autism were on gluten-free and casein-free diets. There is some research that suggests that dietary adaptations can help with the symptoms of some of these different disorders. So you have to deal with that. My snack protocol doesn't include anything with gluten or casein. So everything is gluten-free and dairy-free. I also am vegan, so I don't provide any snacks that contain gelatin or cheese or anything like that. So take these restrictive diets into your planning. When you plan, there are plenty of kids' snacks that you can bring in. You can bring fruits and vegetables if you want to every single week. I use gluten-free animal crackers, gluten-free and vegan fruit snacks, gluten-free pretzels. There are a lot of options. And also Chex. For some reason, some kids really like cereal as a snack. How will you handle difficulty with attention spans? We cannot expect the same things from kids who are developing atypically that we do from kids who are developing typically. Their brains are not the same. Will you allow children to wander when you are teaching? Will you allow them to sit on wobble chairs or tea stools? Will you allow them to be under the table while you're teaching? I think the answer to all these things should be yes, but it is something that you have to think about in advance and provide for. Number 7, think through a classroom schedule. And this is another thing I need to make a video about because I have done this for a long time and I have a very particular way that I like to do things, especially with the curriculum that I use. But you have to think it through for yourself. It depends on how long the time is that you have with your students, as well as everything that you want to squeeze in. If you have 2 hours with your students, that's going to be a much different proposition than I, who have a little over an hour with my students typically. But stay tuned, subscribe, and like this video, and turn on the little bell if you would like to be notified when I post next, because I will be posting separate videos on these steps so that we can go into a little more detail. Number 8, this is where we clearly identify the students already in our population who need the support that we're planning. We identify them, we talk to their families perhaps about this exciting new opportunity that we have. We know that some of our kids have different developmental needs. We know that some of our kids do not like loud environments and that they just haven't really been happy or thriving in our typical services because they're so overwhelming for a lot of kids. And we are planning a separate environment that's going to have more adult support. It's going to have a quieter environment, and it's going to be a lot more hands-on and a lot more interactive in smaller groups. And we think that your child might be one of the ones who benefits from this. We're not diagnosing anyone. We're not telling families that their kid is weird and we're pulling them out. We're telling them that we have extra support to offer and their child hasn't really been happy in our typical programming, and we want everyone to feel happy and get their needs met. Step number 9, we schedule volunteers for specific students. In my case, in previous programs that I have run, my students were really high needs and needed a one-to-one person with them at all times. Now, I do not believe in one-to-one supports or buddy systems in typical programming because the buddies, in my experience, almost never feel well trained or well supported enough, and it can lead to really disastrous results. I can tell you more about that in the follow-up video that I do, but I have some stories to tell, and I don't want any of those to happen to you. This is one of the reasons why I recommend a pull-out classroom that is separate from the typical programming, where all of the volunteers who support kids who need more adult support are all together. This is the only way that I can supervise. This is the only way that I, who in this case am the most experienced and educated in this field, I have the most history dealing with the widest variety of child behaviors and communication needs and all other needs. I want to be right there. I want to be right in the face of the kids and the volunteers who are supporting them, so that I can support the volunteers. Also, so that I can modify strategies that the volunteers might be using that I don't think are the best. And that happens a lot. A volunteer will do something that seems natural to them. Perhaps they're a parent of a typical kid. Perhaps they're teenagers and they're serving with me, and they just don't know any better. I was there too. I did things when I was in graduate school working with preschoolers that I didn't know were not best practices. But I learned, and other people can too, but only if they're taught by someone. If my inexperienced volunteer takes a student, 7 years old, with, communication disorder and oppositional defiant difficulties, and goes into typical programming with that student, they are alone with a student who has really significant needs, and they do not have the experience or the education to deal appropriately with that. And it can fall apart really quickly. They can feel unsupported, and they should, because they aren't being supported. But also that child's behavior can quickly spiral out of control without the appropriate structures, because kids need a lot of support sometimes in order to stay safe and calm and regulated. I like to have everybody under my wings like a mother chicken, so that I can make sure the kids are safe and the volunteers are feeling well supported and also safe. And also, if I have a group of volunteers, I kind of want us to hang out with the students together, and some volunteers are going to naturally gravitate to some specific students. I don't know why this is. I think sometimes there's some sort of connection between a volunteer or an adult and a child, and sometimes they just connect. And if at all possible, I'm going to schedule the people who connect with the kid to the kid they connect with, because it's going to work better. They're just going to, they already love this child and they don't even know why, but they just do. Or maybe the child makes them laugh, or maybe the child looks like their father did when he was a child, and it makes their heart happy. I want volunteers to feel happy when they come to spend time with the kids. I want them to easily love the kids, because sometimes the behaviors can be challenging, and we want to put everything we can on our side as far as volunteers bonding with the children. Step number 10. This is where you have a soft launch. A soft launch is unadvertised. You don't tell anyone you're doing it except for the families that you have identified. This is where you have volunteers, you have the students come, you use your curriculum, and you assess how it's going. Only after you do a soft launch and then try it for a couple of months, only after that would you ever consider doing outreach in your community to invite new families. You need to have a successful routine, a successful pattern of winning with the students, with the volunteers, before you try to grow. Because growth is a stressor on a program, a good stressor in most cases, but it is a stressor. And so we need to be careful that we don't try to go from 0 to 100 all in the space of a month. And then we are to your last step, number 11, evaluate and adjust. You're going to constantly be assessing how things are going. You're going to be asking volunteers, do you see things that aren't really working for us? What can we change? You're going to be looking every week after you hang out with your students. You're going to be thinking, there was that one weird behavior, and I wonder if I could head that off the path somehow. Perhaps if I intervened sooner with a sensory strategy, perhaps he wouldn't have spiraled out of control. Or maybe we actually need a yoga ball for her to sit on during the story time. That might help her be able to attend a little better. Whenever you're evaluating something that happened, it helps to have other people involved in your evaluation, especially if they have professional knowledge in the area, because they're maybe better able to see things that don't appear as naturally to you, or that don't flash quite as brightly to you with their alarm bells. But as long as we are assessing and adjusting, our program is going to continue to get better. And it's going to be more beneficial for the students and their families, and it's going to be more fulfilling for you and for all the volunteers who serve with you. So wherever you are thinking of starting some kind of program for kids who have different needs, I salute you. I think it is fantastic. I'm proud of you. It is a challenging process, but it's so exciting, and it's very meaningful, and it makes life fabulous. It makes life so worth living. Thank you for being here. Leave questions you have down below. You can contact me through my website if you want more information about any coaching or any other suggestions related to developmental differences or programming for children with developmental differences. And of course, subscribe so that you can show up next time when I talk some more about the details of some of these steps. Thank you for being here. See you next time. Bye.